The Bennett family's dream vacation took a shocking turn when Marcus Bennett, an FBI agent, found himself handcuffed in front of his family, treated as a criminal. A man who had dedicated his life to upholding the law was now the target of racial prejudice. Naomi, his wife, and their 2 children, Isaac and Chloe, stood frozen in disbelief, watching as their father was restrained, his dignity stripped away by officers who had no idea of his background or his rank. This was supposed to be a peaceful escape, a time for the family to reconnect away from their high-stakes lives. Ocean View Retreat, with its serene beaches and exclusive atmosphere, had seemed like the perfect sanctuary. For Marcus and Naomi, both dedicated to fighting for justice, this was a rare moment to relax, leaving behind the weight of their careers. But the shadow of prejudice lurked even here, ready to turn their quiet respite into a nightmare. Moments earlier, Marcus had sat back on a lounge chair, his guard finally lowered as he listened to his children's laughter. It was the sound of pure innocence, Isaac and Chloe splashing in the pool, filling the air with joy. For Marcus, their laughter was a symbol of everything he'd vowed to protect. Yet as he watched them play, a sudden unease crept into his mind, a reminder that peace was fragile, always one breath away from shattering. How could it come to this? How could a man who stood for justice, who wore a badge with pride, be stripped of his dignity in front of the very people he loved most? And what would he do now, as his family looked to him, desperate for answers and strength? Stay with us to witness this harrowing story of resilience, injustice, and the fight for dignity. Subscribe now so you won't miss a moment of this powerful journey. The nightmare had started subtly, almost imperceptibly. As Marcus relaxed in his chair, he noticed a security guard approaching, his expression unreadable but his eyes filled with suspicion. The guard's gaze lingered, cold and assessing, as if he'd already made up his mind about the Bennetts. Marcus felt a familiar unease ripple through him, the feeling of being watched, judged. But surely not here, he thought. Not at a place they'd saved and planned for so carefully. "Excuse me, sir," the guard began, his voice firm, lacking the warmth reserved for valued guests. "Can I verify that you're staying here? I'll need your room number." Taken aback, Marcus paused, but kept his voice steady. "Room 402. We checked in yesterday." Naomi looked up from her book, her face immediately reflecting his surprise. This wasn't the first time they'd faced suspicion in places meant for relaxation, yet every time, it hurt in a fresh way. She closed her book slowly, a subtle sign of her readiness to step in. The guard nodded but didn't budge. "I'll have to confirm with the front desk." "Standard procedure," he added, though the term felt empty, mechanical, as if intended to dismiss their discomfort. Naomi, always perceptive, caught the barely concealed hostility. She exchanged a glance with Marcus, silently acknowledging the insult cloaked in procedure. Her voice was polite, but firm, as she asked, "Is there an issue here?" "We've provided the information." The guard's response was evasive. "No issue, ma'am. Just routine checks. We've had problems with, unregistered guests using the facilities." His words, though careful, dripped with an insinuation they couldn't ignore. Marcus, trying to maintain his calm, placed a hand on Naomi's arm. "Let him check," he said softly. But even as he spoke, a knot tightened in his chest. They were here to escape the very prejudice that was now casting a shadow over their vacation. This was supposed to be their sanctuary, yet here they were, being subtly but unmistakably singled out. Naomi's frustration was evident. They had followed every rule, yet that look in the guard's eyes suggested they didn't belong. For all their accomplishments, for all they had achieved, the Bennetts found themselves being reduced to the color of their skin. As Marcus and Naomi sat in silence, their vacation's sense of peace continued to unravel. The guard returned, but this time he wasn't alone. Another guard followed closely behind, his demeanor even colder, as if the presence of 2 children splashing in the pool could possibly signal trouble. "Sir," the first guard started, his tone now sharper, more commanding. "We're going to have to ask you and your family to step away from the pool area until we confirm your reservation details with the front desk." His words were clipped, giving no room for discussion. Marcus sat up, his jaw clenched but his voice steady. I already gave you my room number. There's no need to remove us from the area. Just call the front desk. My family and I have every right to be here. His tone, calm but unyielding, was an unmistakable assertion of dignity, a reminder that they didn't have to explain themselves further. Yet the guard didn't seem moved. In fact, his frown deepened. Naomi, sensing the tension rising, stood as well, her voice clear. Why exactly are you asking us to leave? We've complied with every request. We're here to enjoy the resort just like any other family. Her eyes bore into the guards, each word layered with restrained anger. The guards shifted uncomfortably but maintained their stance, as if refusing to acknowledge her words. One guard replied dismissively, We've had incidents recently with non-guests sneaking into the facilities, and we have to ensure the safety of our paying guests. He glanced at Marcus and Naomi in a way that left no doubt about what he truly meant by non-guests. Naomi's patience frayed, her frustration now evident. She took a step forward. Let me make this clear. We are paying guests. We're in room 402, we've provided all necessary information, and you're still harassing us. Are you applying this policy to every family here, or just ours? Her words hung in the air, uncomfortably blunt, yet they demanded an answer. The guards exchanged a quick look, caught off guard by her defiance. Ma'am, we're just doing our jobs. If you don't comply, we'll have to escalate this further. One of them replied, his voice taut. But his words sounded hollow, as if he knew he was in the wrong yet couldn't let go of his misplaced authority. Marcus, his patience thin, placed a reassuring hand on Naomi's shoulder, signaling her to step back. He looked squarely at the guards, his calm now masking a growing fury. We've complied with every question. We're here for a family vacation. We deserve the same respect as anyone else here. His voice was low, firm, a voice honed from years in the FBI, trained to de-escalate even the most tense of situations. But the guards didn't relent. Instead, one of them took a step closer, his stance aggressive. If you can't cooperate, we'll involve local authorities to handle this matter properly. The threat was clear, an ultimatum wrapped in a false pretense of procedure. Nearby guests had started to notice the commotion. Some paused, watching from a distance, their expressions curious, even uncomfortable, but no one intervened. A few even raised their phones, recording, perhaps sensing an incident unfolding, but still no one stepped forward. Naomi, looking at her children's now worried faces, felt a surge of helplessness and anger. Her children, who had been laughing just moments before, were now clinging closer, their joy stolen in an instant. She had fought for others' rights her entire career, yet now, in front of her children, she was made to feel powerless. This was a different kind of battle, one she hadn't prepared for, and every moment of it carved a new wound. Marcus felt the weight of his family's gaze. His children's confusion, his wife's indignation, it all pressed on him, harder than any professional challenge he'd faced. He had sworn to protect and serve, yet here he was, standing helplessly as his family was humiliated. The tension around the pool was palpable when two police officers arrived, their expressions serious, their eyes fixed on Marcus. The sight of law enforcement should have offered a sense of safety, but to Marcus and Naomi, it felt like an ominous escalation, a signal that their peaceful vacation was now spiraling completely out of control. The officers moved with a commanding presence, unfazed by the Bennett's obvious discomfort. The air felt colder, and Naomi instinctively held Chloe close, shielding her from the hostility she felt radiating toward her family. Sir, we've had a report of unauthorized guests in the area, one officer said, his tone flat but firm. His words hung in the air, loaded with an accusation that felt both unnecessary and unfair. I need to see your identification, he demanded, looking directly at Marcus with an air of authority that brooked no resistance. Marcus hesitated, his FBI badge heavy in his pocket. He'd always carried it as a symbol of pride, but now it felt like an anchor. He knew what he was facing here. Not just a request, but a presumption of guilt based solely on appearances. Beside him, Naomi's eyes flashed with indignation, her body tense as she gripped Chloe's hand. Isaac looked up at his father, confusion and worry evident on his young face. He had always seen his dad as a protector, a man with the power to right wrongs, but now, he saw the doubt flicker across Marcus's face, and it left him silent, uneasy. This was no routine check. Marcus took a slow, steady breath, reaching into his pocket for his FBI badge, hoping that once they saw it, the officers might realize their mistake. He held it up, his fingers firm but his gaze unwavering, saying calmly, "I'm Marcus Bennett, FBI. My family and I are guests here. We're in room 402. There's no misunderstanding." But as he extended his badge, one of the officers raised an eyebrow, a hint of disdain flashing in his eyes. "That doesn't mean anything here," the officer replied, his tone dismissive. "Hand over real identification. A driver's license. Now." The words struck like a blow. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, the unfairness of it gnawing at him. Naomi's face twisted in shock, and she took a step forward, ready to defend her husband, but Marcus subtly raised a hand, signaling her to stop. Isaac and Chloe looked on, both scared and confused. They couldn't understand why their father's badge, the very symbol of law and justice they'd looked up to, was being disregarded so easily. Keeping his composure, Marcus reached for his wallet, pulling out his driver's license and handing it over. Inside, he could feel a storm brewing. The weight of his years in service, the values he'd stood for, now turned on him, as if he were an intruder, a trespasser in a place meant to welcome him and his family. The officer glanced briefly at Marcus's driver's license before tossing it back to him with barely concealed disdain. His lips curled slightly, a mocking smirk that only deepened the sting of humiliation. "We're still waiting on confirmation from the front desk," he said, his tone cold. "Until then, you and your family need to come with us." Marcus's chest tightened. He could feel Naomi tense beside him, and a quick glance at his children showed wide, frightened eyes. This was going beyond any reason, but Marcus knew all too well that pushing back could escalate things dangerously fast. He'd seen it happen to others, but never thought he'd be the one facing it. "Listen," Marcus began, trying to keep his tone calm, but before he could say anything more, one of the officers grabbed his arm roughly. Naomi gasped, reaching instinctively toward her husband, but the other officer blocked her path. "Please, there's no need for this," she said, her voice trembling with anger and fear. "We're guests here. This is our family vacation." But her words fell on deaf ears. Without warning, one of the officers snapped handcuffs onto Marcus's wrists, his movements brisk, as if he were restraining a dangerous criminal. The cold metal bit into Marcus's skin, a sharp, unforgiving reminder of the reality they were trapped in. Naomi's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with a mix of fury and heartbreak as she watched her husband, a man who had dedicated his life to justice, stand handcuffed like a common criminal. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow, the world shrinking down to the shock and disbelief etched on his children's faces. Isaac stood frozen, his hands clenched tightly at his sides, his young mind struggling to process what was happening. His father, his hero, the man who had always taught him about honor and fairness, was standing before him in handcuffs, reduced to a suspect. "Dad?" Isaac's voice was small, shaky, barely a whisper. Marcus turned to his son, forcing a reassuring smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's okay, son," he said softly, though inside, a profound pain twisted through him. This wasn't supposed to happen. His children weren't supposed to witness this kind of injustice, this raw display of prejudice aimed directly at their father. Beside him, Chloe clung to Naomi's leg, her small hands trembling. Her eyes, wide and brimming with tears, darted from her father's restrained wrists to the officers' unyielding faces, trying to make sense of a scene that should have been impossible. She didn't understand why this was happening, only that something terrible was being done to her father, a man who had always protected her, always stood tall. The humiliation ran deeper than any words could describe. Marcus had faced down criminals, navigated life-threatening situations, and fought to uphold the very laws now being weaponized against him. But nothing had prepared him for this moment, for the helplessness of standing handcuffed, powerless, under the gaze of his terrified children. Naomi's voice broke the silence, choked but defiant. "This is wrong. You're traumatizing our children, and for what? Because of some baseless suspicion?" Her words hung in the air, unanswered, her outrage clashing against the officer's unyielding resolve. The onlookers around the pool watched, their expressions a mix of shock and discomfort, but no one stepped forward, no one dared to intervene. Marcus felt the weight of their silence. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. His own sense of dignity, hard-won through years of service and sacrifice, felt stripped away, exposed under the cold scrutiny of authority unchecked by reason or fairness. And as he stood there, under the watchful eyes of his family and the crowd, he felt a searing ache in his heart, not just for himself, but for the pain this was imprinting on his children, a memory they'd carry long after these handcuffs were gone. As Marcus stood handcuffed, the cold metal digging into his wrists, memories flooded his mind, each one a painful reminder of the very injustices he had fought to prevent. Images flashed, cases he had taken on, victims he had defended, families torn apart by acts of prejudice and unchecked power. He had sworn, with every fiber of his being, to be different, to bring fairness and integrity to a system that too often failed those who needed it most. And yet, here he was, caught in the same web, with his own family watching, helpless and hurt. He remembered one particular case, a young man, barely an adult, wrongfully detained by officers who had assumed his guilt based solely on his appearance. Marcus had been relentless in that case, refusing to let it slide, pursuing every lead, ensuring that justice was served. At the time, he had seen himself as a guardian against such evils, a protector of those who couldn't defend themselves. But now, he felt the bitter irony of standing on the other side, experiencing firsthand the very indignity he had tried to shield others from. Through the haze of these painful memories, Marcus caught sight of his son, Isaac, standing rigid, his face a mirror of confusion and betrayal. That look struck him deeply. Isaac was at an age where he was beginning to understand the world's complexities, but this was something Marcus had hoped to keep far from him, to protect him from for as long as possible. Isaac had looked up to him, had seen him as a figure of strength, someone who brought justice where there was none. And now, Marcus feared this moment would replace that image, leaving his son with questions he might never be able to answer. Naomi's voice, still sharp with outrage, cut through his thoughts. "You're hurting him! You have no right!" she cried, her words filled with a mother's fury, her arms wrapped protectively around Chloe, who clung to her leg, her small frame shaking with silent tears. Naomi's strength gave him comfort, a reminder that even now, in this moment of utter vulnerability, he wasn't alone. Her resilience was like a lifeline, grounding him, reminding him of the family he was fighting to protect. Marcus took a deep breath, willing himself to stay calm, to keep his anger in check. He knew that reacting with rage would only worsen the situation, feeding into the very stereotypes these officers likely held about him. He had learned long ago that anger, however justified, could be a dangerous tool in moments like this. His family needed him to be steady, to be the calm within the storm. Yet beneath his calm exterior, a powerful resolve was building, an unbreakable vow that he would not let this moment define them. He had always believed that strength wasn't just in action but in restraint, in knowing when to fight and when to wait. This was a battle he couldn't afford to lose, not here, not in front of his children. He wouldn't give these officers the satisfaction of seeing him break, of watching his family crumble under their gaze. As he steadied himself, he thought about Chloe, still so young, her innocence now bruised by a world she barely understood. He remembered her laughter earlier by the pool, her radiant smile that could light up even his darkest days. The pain in her eyes now was something he couldn't bear. This was a wound he knew would leave scars, marks that would take years, if not a lifetime, to fade. And he felt a fierce determination grow within him, a promise that he would turn this moment of humiliation into a lesson in resilience for his children. Turning his gaze to Isaac, he locked eyes with his son, offering a silent message of reassurance. He needed Isaac to see beyond the handcuffs, beyond the harsh words and rough treatment. He wanted his son to know that real strength wasn't in fists or fury, but in the ability to stand tall, even when the world tried to knock you down. He wanted Isaac to remember this moment not as a story of defeat, but as a testament to dignity, to holding your head high even when everything felt stacked against you. Naomi's grip on his arm reminded him of the bond they shared, a bond forged through years of shared struggles, of standing side by side through trials both in and outside the courtroom. She had always been his anchor, and he hers. Her unwavering stance beside him now was a testament to that shared strength. They would get through this, together. The officers might have been able to place him in handcuffs, but they could never strip away the pride, the unity, and the unshakable bond of the family he'd fought so hard to build. In that moment, Marcus made a silent promise: he would see this through. He would show his children that even when confronted with the worst, there was always a way to rise above. This moment would not break them. Instead, it would become the very foundation of the resilience, dignity, and strength they would carry with them forever. Naomi had seen enough. With Marcus standing restrained and her children clinging to her side in fear, something within her ignited. The humiliation and anger boiling inside her fueled an unbreakable resolve. Straightening up, Naomi stepped forward, her gaze locked onto the officers with unwavering determination. Her voice, though calm, rang with a power that cut through the air. "This is beyond unacceptable," she said, her words deliberate, sharp. "My husband has shown you every piece of identification, answered every question, and yet here you are, treating us like criminals. You're traumatizing my children and violating our dignity. For what? Because of a baseless suspicion?" Her voice didn't waver, each word carrying the weight of her anger and strength, and the onlookers around the pool began to murmur, their faces reflecting a mix of shock and sympathy. One of the officers shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught off guard by her firm stance. "Ma'am, we're only following protocol," he replied, his tone defensive. "We have the right to verify." Naomi cut him off, her gaze piercing. "Protocol? Or prejudice? Don't insult us by hiding behind hollow excuses. We've complied with everything you asked, yet you've treated my husband, a federal agent, like a criminal in front of his own family." Her voice rose slightly, filled with a righteous anger that held the officers in place. She wasn't just speaking for her family, she was challenging the injustice staring them in the face. Beside her, Chloe held onto her mother's hand tightly, her small fingers clinging to Naomi's strength. Isaac, though visibly shaken, looked up at his mother with awe and pride, sensing the power in her words even if he couldn't fully grasp the gravity of the situation. Naomi's fierce protection over her family was the one constant they could hold on to amid the chaos. The other officer, perhaps feeling the intensity of the moment, attempted to regain control. "Ma'am, if you continue to disrupt, we'll have to ask you to step back," he warned, though his tone lacked conviction. It was clear he hadn't anticipated resistance, not from a woman standing alone against them, her voice rising as the calm resolve in her words cut through the growing crowd's silence. But Naomi didn't back down. She took another step forward, meeting the officer's gaze head-on. "You've already taken enough from us today. My family deserves respect, and you've stripped it away without cause. If you're so certain in your protocol, then I'll make sure this incident reaches those higher than you. Because I will not allow this injustice to be hidden or excused." Her words resonated, and a hushed silence fell over the pool area. Naomi's courage was unmistakable, her voice carrying not just for her family but for everyone who had ever been made to feel unwelcome, judged, or dismissed. Just as the tension seemed poised to escalate further, the steady sound of footsteps approached, and the crowd parted as the police chief, Deputy Chief Garrett, arrived on the scene. His presence was commanding, and the other officers quickly straightened, recognizing his authority. Garrett took a moment to survey the situation, his eyes moving from the handcuffs on Marcus's wrists to the defiant look on Naomi's face, then to the frightened expressions of Isaac and Chloe clinging close to their mother. "What's going on here?" Garrett's voice was steady but sharp, carrying a weight that instantly quieted the murmurs in the crowd. He had clearly picked up on the gravity of the situation, but the sight before him was a scene he had not anticipated: a family on vacation, forced into a confrontation that should never have taken place. One of the officers quickly stepped forward, visibly flustered. "Chief, we were just following protocol. We received a report about unauthorized guests, and when we tried to verify their identity, there was resistance." Naomi, hearing this, took a breath, her eyes narrowing. She didn't need to say anything. Her expression alone conveyed the sheer injustice of that statement. But Garrett raised a hand, silencing the officer. He turned directly to Marcus, who still stood restrained, his face a careful mask of dignity and restraint despite the humiliation. "Sir, I understand you've identified yourself as a federal agent," Garrett began, his tone more measured now, as he scrutinized Marcus. "If that's correct, then I apologize for any misunderstanding. Let's resolve this quickly." Naomi couldn't stay silent any longer. "A misunderstanding?" she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "My husband showed them his badge, his driver's license, every piece of identification they asked for. And yet he's standing here in handcuffs. You call that a misunderstanding?" Garrett met her gaze, his expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. "Ma'am, I apologize for any inconvenience. We are, of course, committed to respecting our guests and their rights," he replied, though his words felt practiced, hollow. Marcus held Garrett's gaze, his voice calm but firm. "This goes beyond inconvenience, Chief," he said. "My family has been humiliated, my children frightened, because of an assumption rooted in nothing but prejudice. I swore to uphold the law, to serve and protect. But today, in front of my own family, I've been made to feel like a criminal." The chief's face tightened as he absorbed Marcus's words, and he finally nodded to one of the officers. "Take off the cuffs," he ordered quietly. One of the officers, looking chastened, quickly moved to unlock the handcuffs from Marcus's wrists. The crowd, which had been watching in a mix of shock and outrage, murmured as the metal restraints fell away, leaving red marks on Marcus's wrists. As he rubbed his sore wrists, Marcus's children, Isaac and Chloe, rushed to his side, clinging to him as if to reassure themselves that their father was truly safe. Naomi placed a steadying hand on Marcus's shoulder, her expression resolute, still brimming with quiet anger but tempered now by relief. Deputy Chief Garrett cleared his throat, looking around at the assembled crowd before turning his attention back to the Bennetts. "Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Bennett, again, I apologize for any misunderstanding. Rest assured, we'll conduct an internal review to ensure this doesn't happen again." Naomi looked directly at him, her voice calm but unwavering. "An internal review is a start, but it's not enough. What happened here today wasn't just an error. It was a violation of our dignity, of our right to be here without prejudice. My children saw their father in handcuffs. You can't erase that with a few apologies." Garrett's eyes flickered, clearly unaccustomed to facing such direct criticism. But he nodded, his expression serious. "I understand, Mrs. Bennett. And I'll make sure this is taken seriously." Naomi's expression didn't soften. She knew too well the weight of promises made in the heat of the moment. "I expect accountability, Chief Garrett," she said, her voice steady. "Not just for us, but for anyone who's had to face this kind of treatment. This can't be swept under the rug." The crowd had grown completely silent, absorbing every word. Marcus, standing beside his wife, felt a surge of pride at her resolve. Today's ordeal was far from over, but in this moment, he saw the strength in Naomi's voice resonate, not just with him, but with everyone present. Marcus looked around at the crowd, his family close by, the sting of the handcuffs still fresh on his wrists. He could feel the weight of every gaze upon him, some watching with sympathy, others with curiosity, but all silent witnesses to what had just unfolded. He knew that this was more than a personal affront. It was a moment that symbolized something bigger, something he couldn't ignore. Taking a step forward, Marcus turned to Deputy Chief Garrett, his voice calm but resonant. "Chief, what happened today doesn't just affect me or my family. This moment, this treatment, reflects something larger, something that so many others face daily. As a federal agent, I took an oath to protect justice, and that oath doesn't stop when I'm off duty. Today, my family and I were victims of the very discrimination I've fought against. This isn't just about an apology. It's about accountability. The crowd listened intently, the weight of his words settling over them. Naomi stood beside him, nodding in agreement, her hand resting protectively on Isaac's shoulder. She could see the determination in her husband's eyes, the fire that came from his own pain mixed with a deep sense of responsibility. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was a call for change. Marcus continued, his gaze unwavering. There are countless families who don't have the platform to speak out when they're wrong. Today, you saw what my family went through. And though it's painful, I'm grateful it was seen, because people need to understand that discrimination, prejudice, can reach anyone, anywhere. If it can happen to us, it can happen to anyone. The deputy chief shifted uncomfortably, clearly taken aback by Marcus's unwavering conviction. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but Marcus wasn't finished. His voice grew stronger, reaching every corner of the crowd around them. I will not let this be swept under the rug. My family and I deserve justice, but we're not the only ones. This isn't just about making sure my children feel safe again, it's about ensuring that no other family has to go through this. No one should have to experience what we did today, especially in a place meant to provide peace. A murmur of agreement swept through the onlookers. People nodded, their expressions reflecting the gravity of Marcus's words. The collective realization was undeniable. They weren't just witnessing an isolated incident, but a moment of reckoning, a confrontation with biases that all too often go unchallenged. Naomi's voice broke through, adding strength to her husband's words. We will take this as far as it needs to go. Not just for us, but for everyone who has ever felt unwelcome, everyone who has been judged unfairly. This isn't just our fight, it's a fight for fairness, for respect, and for dignity. In that moment, they weren't just Marcus and Naomi Bennett. They were a family standing against prejudice, their voices amplifying the silent struggles of countless others. As Marcus and Naomi stood side by side, resolute and unyielding, a voice from the crowd finally broke the silence. He's right. A woman called out, stepping forward, phone in hand. I recorded the whole thing. This is wrong, and people deserve to see it. Her statement, full of conviction, sent a ripple of agreement through the crowd. Others raised their phones, showing recordings they had taken of the confrontation. Some had captured the moment Marcus was handcuffed, the fear in his children's eyes, the look of pain and disbelief on Naomi's face. Each angle, each recording told the story of a family unjustly humiliated, and now, those bystanders who had initially stood silent were stepping forward to offer their voices in solidarity. Another man spoke up, his tone apologetic yet supportive. I saw everything. This was completely uncalled for, and if you need witnesses, count me in. More nods of agreement came from those around him. The expressions on their faces conveyed a mixture of guilt for staying silent and determination to right the wrong they had witnessed. One by one, they came forward, offering their videos, their accounts, fragments of the truth that, together, would shine a light on the injustice the Bennetts had faced. Naomi, moved by the sudden support, looked at each person, a flicker of hope, mingling with her residual anger. Thank you, she said, her voice soft but heartfelt. This is more than just about us. Your support, your willingness to stand up, it matters. Together, we can make sure no one else has to go through this. Marcus watched the crowd, a sense of vindication rising within him. Despite the humiliation they had endured, there was now something powerful forming, a collective voice willing to stand against what they all knew was wrong. He turned to Deputy Chief Garrett, who looked visibly uncomfortable with the attention and the undeniable evidence against his officers. The chief cleared his throat, attempting to maintain control. Everyone, please, he began, his tone now more conciliatory. We will be conducting a thorough investigation, and I assure you, the officers involved will be held accountable if any misconduct is found. I understand your concerns, and I thank you for bringing them to our attention. But the crowd was no longer willing to simply accept promises. They had seen too much, felt the raw injustice, and they wanted answers, not just empty assurances. A young woman near the front spoke up, her voice steady. An investigation is the bare minimum. We want to know that changes will be made, that no other family will have to experience what they did. The murmurs of agreement grew louder, the crowd now unified in their demand for accountability and change. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude and pride, not only in his family but in these strangers who had chosen to speak out, to hold the authorities accountable. What had started as a painful and isolating experience was now evolving into a powerful statement of solidarity and justice. Isaac, standing close to his father, looked up at him with admiration. For the first time that day, Marcus saw a glimmer of hope return to his son's eyes. He gently placed a reassuring hand on Isaac's shoulder, feeling the strength of his family and community by his side. Naomi turned to the crowd one last time, her gaze steady. "This isn't the end of it," she said, her voice strong. "We will pursue this not just for our family, but for every person who has ever been made to feel less than. Together, we will make sure this doesn't happen again." As the Bennetts stood amidst the growing support, surrounded by people willing to lend their voices, they knew they were no longer alone. This was not just a fight for their own dignity. It was a stand for justice, for equality, and for the belief that no one should ever feel unsafe or unwelcome in their own country. As the crowd around them gradually dispersed, Marcus and Naomi knew their fight was just beginning. This moment wasn't something they could allow to fade into another memory of injustice. Not for them, not for their children, and not for the countless others who had faced similar treatment. They both understood that what had happened was a breach of trust, of dignity, that needed to be addressed not just personally but publicly. Marcus turned to Naomi, his gaze steady. "We can't let this go," he said, his voice low but filled with resolve. Naomi nodded, her expression hardening with the same determination. "This goes beyond today, Marcus. If we stay silent, it'll happen again. We owe it to our children, and to every other family, to make sure this is addressed in the open." Naomi took a deep breath and looked at the faces of her children, Isaac and Chloe, who had witnessed an unforgettable lesson in resilience. She could see in Isaac's eyes a newfound understanding, a mix of sadness and strength, a realization that sometimes standing up for justice meant going through difficult trials. Chloe clung to her mother's hand, her young mind still trying to comprehend what had happened, but Naomi knew this experience had planted something in her daughter as well, a fierce awareness of fairness, of dignity, that would stay with her for life. Taking her phone from her bag, Naomi dialed the number of her colleague at her law firm. As an attorney who had spent years defending marginalized communities, she was already considering the steps needed to pursue legal action. The weight of her commitment was clear as she spoke, her voice unwavering. "Yes, we'll need to gather every recording, every statement," she said, pausing as she looked out over the emptying pool area. "This isn't just a complaint. We're going to make this a case." Marcus stood beside her, feeling the gravity of their decision settle over him. This wasn't just a matter of personal justice. It was a decision to stand up against a larger system of prejudice that so many people faced in silence. They knew this fight would be long, that it might invite scrutiny, even backlash, but their resolve was unshakable. They were not merely seeking retribution. They were working to expose a deeply ingrained issue that needed to be addressed if true justice was ever to prevail. Naomi's conversation with her colleague was brief but decisive, and as she hung up, she turned to Marcus with a look of fierce determination. "We'll start with the legal groundwork, gather all the evidence, and make sure this story is told. It won't be easy, but it's the right thing to do," she said, her voice strong. Marcus nodded, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Whatever it takes, we'll see this through. This isn't just for us, it's for everyone who's been silenced, everyone who's been made to feel less than. If we have the chance to stand up, we have to take it." Isaac, listening intently to his parents' conversation, looked up with newfound respect. "Dad, does this mean you're going to make sure they can't do this to anyone else?" His voice was hopeful, filled with a sense of purpose he had learned not just from words, but from seeing his parents' strength firsthand. Marcus looked down at his son, pride swelling in his chest. "Yes, Isaac," he replied, his voice gentle but firm. "We're going to make sure people know what happened here, and we're going to do everything we can to stop it from happening again. Sometimes standing up for what's right means taking on a tough battle, but that's what makes us stronger." Naomi looked at her children, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "Remember, no matter how hard it gets, we stand together. And when you fight for what's right, you're never truly alone." Her words were meant not only to reassure them but to solidify in her own heart the commitment they were about to make. The Bennetts were prepared to fight, not just for themselves but for something bigger, for a future where no family would have to endure what they had, for a society that valued justice and equality over appearances and assumptions. They had a long road ahead, but as they looked at each other, they knew they had the strength, the love, and the unity to see it through. With the police gone, Naomi's focus shifted to the other party responsible, the management of Ocean View Retreat. The humiliation her family endured wasn't just at the hands of the police. It had begun with the resort staff, who had called the authorities based solely on unspoken assumptions. Naomi knew she couldn't leave without addressing it. Approaching the reception desk, she asked firmly to speak with the manager. Within moments, a man in a suit appeared, his expression a mix of concern and discomfort. He had likely heard about the incident, and now found himself face to face with a woman determined to make things right. "Mrs. Bennett," he started, his voice hesitant. "I'd like to apologize on behalf of the resort for any distress caused. I assure you, it was never our intention for this to happen." Naomi held his gaze, her expression unwavering. "Your intention doesn't change the outcome. My family was singled out, humiliated, and made to feel unwelcome here, in a place where we came for peace." Her words were calm but packed with undeniable strength, each one striking the manager visibly. "We followed protocol," he replied, though his tone faltered. "There have been issues with non-guests accessing the facilities. We were just... Were you following the same protocol with every family here?" Naomi interrupted, her eyes blazing. "Or was it just us?" The question hung in the air, a challenge he couldn't meet. His silence was an answer in itself, and it only strengthened her resolve. "Let me be clear," Naomi continued, her voice firm and direct. "This isn't about compensation or apologies. This is about accountability. You allowed prejudice to guide your decisions, and you brought trauma into my children's lives. We deserve to feel safe, respected, and valued, as does every guest who walks into this resort, regardless of who they are or what they look like." The manager swallowed hard, nodding as if he could feel the weight of her words. "Mrs. Bennett, please know we'll be conducting an internal review, and we'll take every step necessary to ensure this never happens again." Naomi's gaze didn't soften. "I expect more than promises. We're moving forward with legal action, and this incident will be brought to light. You may not have intended this, but the impact on my family is real. And we won't stop until we see real change, not just for us, but for every family who deserves respect." With that, Naomi turned and walked away, leaving the manager standing there, visibly shaken. Her message was clear, unyielding. She was no longer speaking just as a mother or a guest, but as an advocate for fairness and dignity. In the days following the incident, word of what had happened to the Bennetts spread rapidly. Social media posts, fueled by video recordings from witnesses at the resort, began circulating widely, drawing attention from far beyond the local community. People were outraged, sharing their own stories and expressing solidarity with the Bennetts. What started as a painful moment for one family quickly became a rallying cry for many, sparking conversations about implicit bias, equality, and justice. Soon, civil rights organizations and social advocacy groups reached out, offering their support. The National Civil Liberties Association contacted Naomi directly, expressing their intention to stand by the Bennett's case and provide any legal assistance needed. "We believe in holding establishments accountable for actions driven by prejudice," the association's representative told her. "Your courage to speak up is creating an opportunity for real change, and we're here to help make that happen. Local community leaders and activists joined in, planning to organize a peaceful rally outside the resort to demand accountability. The rally's message was clear: no more silent tolerance of discrimination. The Bennett's experience was, unfortunately, not unique, and it was time to shine a spotlight on the treatment that too many families endured in silence. Naomi and Marcus, though still grappling with the emotional toll of the experience, felt strengthened by the outpouring of support. It was no longer just about their own fight. It had become a movement for fairness, for dignity, and for every family who had felt the sting of prejudice. Standing together, with allies from both near and far, the Bennetts felt a renewed sense of hope. They were no longer alone in this battle. The community had spoken, and it was a voice too powerful to ignore. As the weeks passed, the Bennetts found themselves at the heart of a growing movement. Media outlets picked up their story, amplifying the message that no family should be subjected to such humiliation and injustice. The legal proceedings were underway, with civil rights groups rallying to support them, while Naomi and Marcus became symbols of resilience and integrity. But beyond the headlines, the heart of their fight remained deeply personal, a mission to ensure their children knew the true value of dignity, courage, and unity. One evening, after another long day of preparing statements and coordinating with advocates, Marcus and Naomi gathered with Isaac and Chloe in their living room. The weight of what they had endured lingered, but so did a new sense of purpose. They were no longer simply reacting to the injustice. They were actively shaping the path forward. Naomi looked at her children, both of whom had grown in ways no child should ever have to. "I know these past weeks have been difficult," she began softly, her gaze moving from Isaac's solemn face to Chloe's wide, questioning eyes. "But I want you to remember that what we're doing isn't just for us. It's for every family who deserves to feel safe and respected, no matter where they are." Isaac nodded slowly, processing his mother's words. "Mom, does this mean that we're making things better for other people too?" he asked, his voice filled with a mixture of understanding and pride. Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Yes, Isaac. Standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but sometimes, doing what's hard is what makes a real difference. It's about more than our own experience. It's about helping others feel the same dignity and respect that everyone deserves." Chloe, still young but wiser from the ordeal, reached for her mother's hand. "Daddy, will people stop being mean because of what we're doing?" Naomi pulled her daughter close, her heart heavy yet hopeful. "Sweetheart, we may not change everyone, but we can create a world where it's harder for people to treat others unfairly. And every step we take brings us closer to that world." The family sat in a moment of silence, each reflecting on the journey they had been forced to take. The pain was still there, a reminder of what they'd endured, but so was a new bond, a shared purpose that strengthened the ties between them. The journey toward justice had transformed into something far greater, a commitment to each other, to their community, and to a vision of a society where every person's worth was recognized. As they embraced, Marcus felt a profound sense of pride and gratitude. The unity of his family, the unwavering strength of his wife, and the courage blossoming in his children were the true victories in their story. No matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their spirits unbroken. In the following days, as the legal case continued and community support grew, the Bennett story became a beacon for others, a reminder that change often starts with one voice, and that voice, when joined by others, could become a powerful force for justice. Their fight was not yet over, but they knew they had already won something invaluable: the respect of their community, the strength of their family, and the knowledge that standing up for what was right would always be worth it. As the lights in their home dimmed that night, the Bennetts closed another chapter in their journey, prepared for whatever came next. Together, they were ready, not only to defend their own dignity but to pave the way for a better, more just world for everyone. Their story was a testament that love, resilience, and unity could transform even the darkest moments into a legacy of hope. As the Bennetts closed this chapter in their journey, they stood united, prepared to continue their fight for justice and equality, not just for themselves but for all. Their story is a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the courage to stand up for what's right, a legacy of hope for a fairer world. If this story resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel to support more stories that shine a light on resilience, justice, and change. Together, let's build a community that values compassion and dignity for all.